Hello, creative bureaucrats. It is an absolute honor to be in a space like this today and to create conversations about the stories that matter, the things that matter to us, not only in the different clusters to which we are categorized as people, but to us as human beings. I am a Zimbabwean, proud African, a woman, and I have dreadlocks, and for me that's a bonus. I've always had this conversation with people about the importance of reflecting on where we stand and who we are and the stories that we inherently carry, and how the stories are so important with regards to how we show up in the world, how we make decisions not only about our families, our communities, but our countries, about how our countries relate with other countries, and that how overly all of that has a bearing on the progression of humanity. I was born in 1998 in a country called Zimbabwe. And by the time we got to 1998, if you had been following the history, there had been a drought, there had been a lot of economic and social issues that had happened that had led to economic collapse. And by the time that I was born, the situation was quite bad. And for the generation like myself, we have never known what it truly means to live in a country in which basic human rights, basic stuff such as getting clean water, basic things like that, were actually upheld. Now, growing up in a country like that, there was a big conversation about how the generations that had actually seen a functional Zimbabwe, a post-colonial Zimbabwe in the 1980s, had those memories of what it was like to have functioning systems. But for my generation, people who were always concerned that we had never seen function or normalcy, henceforth, what could be a possible outcome of that particular generation? What could that generation actually do to make a difference? Because we had no inherent memories of what was. Henceforth, what kind of future could we create? Now, as I grew older, given all of the situations that I had encountered and seen in my country, it led me towards joining other young people who had seen that it does not work to have systems that are not functional. And I found myself naturally gravitating towards activist spaces. And I always tell people that in my family, we had no history of activism. But because you could see what was happening enough that it could infuriate you, I decided to actually step up and do something about it. And the stories that emanated from that are stories of arrests. They're stories of having fellow friends abducted and tortured. Some of them have fled the country. They are stories of immense suffering. And from these particular experiences and stories, I find my hope. Because I know so many people, and I have met so many people, worked with so many people, who amidst all of the dangers of them being able to speak out, demand accountability, demand that citizens have the rights to clean, safe drinking water. Citizens have the right to participate and not fear, like what Obama says, some people coming to knock on your door at night. People had the right to speak up freely, to express themselves. And these were the conversations that echoed from the streets. But at some point, I realized that our street activism was not enough. Because while we were dealing with corrupt governments that we had to confront, governments that had an insistence on using the deep state for state capture, that were robbing the economy dry, that citizens had no social protection, no healthcare infrastructure. Citizens would suffer and struggle, and still no one would even bother to concern themselves and to try and fix the problem. When we were making our noise in the streets, organizing, bringing people together, we realized that there could be something bigger, something more. And for me, that was the realization that there are so many historical nuances, so many stories from the past that were affecting our present state. I would listen to some of the arguments of the revolutionaries, of the leaders, who, when we talked to them about corruption, they would always insist that no, it is not us. We are functioning in a system that is hostile, a system internationally that is hostile to African states. I would also listen to the narratives of the states that are from other parts of the world And they would say, no, no, it is not the system, it is your corruption. Eventually, I had to ask myself, why can we not have both conversations? Because as a young African woman who is living in post-colonial Zimbabwe, I understand fully well that inasmuch as they are deeply intrinsic societal issues such as corruption, there are also a lot of other issues that were beyond our state borders, that were finding themselves in an international system that was highly militant to African states. So, I came to the resolution that for us to be successful as activists, as change makers, as hopeful Africans, but also hopeful global citizens, we needed to have a conversation that transcended states and that had the emphasis of addressing issues of historical injustice in our fight for democracy. And that for us meant having conversations around decolonization. It meant having conversations around the concept of Ubuntu, the belief that I am because you are, as Nelson Mandela said. Having conversations about intergenerational co-leadership, because the bulk of people in my country and across the continent are young people. Having all of those conversations and the idea that we would bring nuance, we would bring interconnectedness to all of these different issues that affected a young, present Zimbabwean today. Now, having said all of that, as I always tell people, we don't have these conversations to blame or to build conflict, but to find nuance and context. And to realize that, as what Kofi Annan says, more than ever before in human history, we share a common destiny, and we can master it only if we face it together. The issues that are happening, climate change, migration crisis, all of the geopolitical concerns that we have, the poly crisis as we call it, are not issues that any singular state alone is capable of resolving. There is a high need for us to build more conversation, more dialogue, to realize the story of the other, the story, as I say, of people we call foals, and to try and find each other, to listen to how the stories are spread out across the world, and to realize that there are a number of things that have happened in the past that can limit how we relate and how we dialogue in the present moment. So today I have the courage to speak truths that are often very difficult, truths that are complicated. But I believe that the moment we have the courage to talk about the things that hurt us, and to also listen to the things that hurt the other, to not look down on the experience, but rather to pay attention to what it is that they desire, the desire to be heard, the desire to be understood, the desire to be seen as an equal and treated as such, we put ourselves in a better position to build the unity that is necessary for us to solve the global problems that we experience. As a young African and a young Zimbabwean who has been privileged to be invited in spaces like this, I always take it as a moment and an opportunity to inspire hope. And that is the hope that comes from young people who every day are organizing in highly totalitarian regimes, who speak truth to power, even if it means that they will be spending the rest of their lives in exile or in prison. All of the stories of human rights defenders and activists who are persecuted for what they believe in, I embody all of those experiences and bring them into a platform like this. And to make an insistence of saying that we, within ourselves, have the intrinsic capability and capacity to not let the powerful, to not let those with guns intimidate us, but to find each other within the complex matrix of our individual stories, through our ability to listen and empathize with the stories of other people, but while we also bring our stories to the table, because all of our stories matter. So to conclude everything, I would like to leave it at this. When we were doing a tour yesterday, I learned of a man called Albrecht Haushofer. And he was in prison, and he wrote a very intriguing piece of poetry, a sonnet. And last night I spent a moment just reading it, where he talked about, under all the masonry and all the steel bars, august, There was life there. And when I personally reflect on all of these words that were written in a tumultuous time in which a person was imprisoned, I believe that all of us, from wherever we come from, find ourselves in prisons of our own. This could be prisons of totalitarian regimes that deny people their rights. This could be hegemonies that oppress, women, girls, cultures that keep certain types of people down based off of racial discrimination, or maybe an extension of a colonial legacy or colonial mindset. But we often have to remember that we are only prisoners if we decide to not allow ourselves to imagine better. Even if we are physically confined, the spirit of resistance and the spirit of struggle must continue. And sometimes it finds itself in artistic expression. Sometimes it finds itself in public speaking, like I do. Sometimes it finds itself in organizing street protest, in engagements with very complicated bureaucrats, being able to bring that very difficult truth to them while trying to maintain a relationship. It finds in itself an engagement in a wide array of expressions of resistance. But my truest belief is that the spirit of struggle, the spirit of resistance, must be kept alive. And I will end it with the words of Samora Machel, who was a revolutionary in Mozambique, a neighboring country, Pan-African, who said, "A luta continua," which means the struggle continues. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Thank you. Yes. I wanted to give the opportunity to ask one question. Do we have somebody who is motivated to have one question to Namatai? Now or never? I'm trying hard with you. Huh? I mean, like, really. I offer you to speak with the Kofi Annan inaugural awardee, right? NextGen. No one? Where are you? Yes. Can we run upstairs? There is someone, please. There. Yes, please go down. This is fantastic.
Meet me.
Yes. Don't fall.
Thank you. So thank you so much for your speech and for your work and for getting up to do your work every day. And my question actually is, like, what keeps you as a human going and get up every morning to do the work?
Thank you very much. Very personal question.
Okay. I was not expecting a question like that. Okay.
Good question, it means.
Absolutely. So I think for me, what keeps me going is exactly what I'm here to talk about, which is hope. And my kind of hope is not, a kind of a fictitious thing that, maybe if we sit around and wait, good things will happen. It is basically aggravated by my own personal actions, but the actions that other people take. Because I believe that in history, there are moments where what took 100 years of planning, organizing, and fighting for just happens in like a day, or like 3 years, or like a year. And in between those, we call them moments of rupture, there are silent and quiet periods where you could be doing stuff and you don't see any change, you don't see any difference. And it's so tedious, it's so frustrating. But we must always know that whatever efforts we are taking go into the ether, and they count for something. They will eventually, gradually yield some fruit. And the question is always, do we create those moments of rupture because we are acting, or are this moment of rupture a thing of circumstance or chance? I believe that they are both. I believe that what is necessary is not to focus on the moments of rupture, but to believe that whatever little steps we are taking in those quiet years and quiet periods are leading to something big, because nothing is ever truly lost. That is what I believe in. So that's why I hope, that's why I draw hope from others when I watch them do what they do, and that is why I continue to do the work that I do every day. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this inspiring work. This is wonderful. Thank you.